And a very good morning to you, top of the week indeed to you. This is Newsline, live as always from the Newsfirst studios in Dawes Street in Colombo. And in this sea of politics and candidacies and so on, we appear to be missing our focus on one thing, and which is the economic performance of our country. It seems easily forgotten, but that is the root cause of the people's concern. Keeping in line with all of that, we've got here with us an economic analyst and author, Varuna Singapuli, here in the studio to try and throw some light on what can be done, what should be done, why isn't anything being done about the economy. Very good morning to you, Varuna.
Good morning, Faraz.
Welcome on to the program.
Thank you.
Is it really a simple task to fix our economy? And if it is so simple, why hasn't it been done? Might be a good starting point.
Yes, it's certainly not simple, it's complicated. So that's why I wouldn't find fault with a lot of politicians, because it looks very complicated. So the starting point would be to try and simplify it. And that's what I have tried to do with this book.
Yes, the book's called A Simple Plan for Sri Lanka.
Yes, that's right.
But really, honestly, can you have a simple plan for Sri Lanka?
Yes, so the starting point would be to simplify the whole problem. See, we always hear criticism of how bad things are.
Yeah.
The fact that there's corruption, inefficiency, absence of law and order.
That's because things are bad.
Yes, but we don't hear a practical plan. What we hear are slogans. So it's unlikely whether these slogans could make that much of a difference in the absence of a well thought out plan. So that's the whole purpose of this book. So like I said, although the problem is complicated, we have to try and make it simpler. So what I have tried to argue in this book is the core problem of Sri Lanka is the fact that we are low income country, which means everybody is underpaid. And even more importantly, there is no hope of a significant improvement in income. So that leads to all the problems. People leaving the country, corruption,
why do you say no
stealing.
hope?
Well, that has been the case for the last 10-20 years. Income-wise, income has not grown much to a satisfactory level, which is what leads to people to leave the country, to go into corruption, stealing,
Well, we did have
drugs,
the last
and so
10
on.
years, up to 2014, let's say, the growth rate was around 7%.
What I'm talking about is the people's income.
Right.
Okay? So that has not grown enough, which is why all these other problems are. So I call it the symptoms. So when people try to rectify the symptoms, the core, and not address the core problem remains. So we are not going to make much of a success by trying to rectify the symptoms. So that's why I say make it simpler by identify the core problem and try to use all your resources, because the resources are limited,
Right.
and problems are so much. So you have to focus most of your resources to address the core problem, which might see, and if we improve the income levels, if we address the core problem, automatically, without much of an effort, all the other problems will get rectified in due course. So that's why I say my whole thesis of this book is to increase the income from 4,000 to 10,000. You know, focus your resources, because resources are limited.
How long will that take? In your simple plan?
We can see in the this book is about the next 5 years. Okay, no point in talking about 10-20 years. These 5 years, put the right things in place, and you will see a material difference, a material change in the whole scenario, which would give a lot of hope to everybody. So it's not a 20-year plan, it's a 5-year plan.
Right.
Which means in 5 years you will see a material difference.
So what is the core problem?
The core problem is the low income, like I said. So the plan is all about increasing it to...
How do you get the income going up?
So that's why the starting point...
The whole country is listening to you now.
The starting point, I think we have the opportunity of the century right now, the way I see it, because the two economic superpowers, China and USA, are very much interested in Sri Lanka, and that's the biggest competitive advantage that Sri Lanka has right now. So the next president and the parliament, from day one, they should start negotiating with China and USA, and that will be difficult.
What about India?
India as well. See, I mean, we have to keep them in the loop, but see,
well, they're going to be up there.
India's
headed in that direction.
Well, we have to manage them as well. But as you can see, if you've been following the last in the recent past, the greatest attention is from China and USA, and that's where, according to this book, what I've tried to explain is that's where we can get the technology from one side and access the market on the other side and make a solid plan. Okay, so that's the whole book is about. It will be a tough negotiation process, as we have seen with the US-China trade war. It has been going for over a year. The same thing we can expect. It will take some time, but even within 2 years, if we can come to a deal with China and a deal with USA, that will be a phenomenal game changer for Sri Lanka within 2 years. So that's why I said 5 years is enough time for us to make inroads. The first 2 years will be very, very critical.
So you're saying that because of leaning towards China,
yes,
now we need to lean somewhere else?
Not really. We have to balance the two relationships. What I'm saying is, if I may explain, with China, what we have to do is, all this time what we have asked, what we have got is, say, maybe 1,000 ambulances, 1,000 houses, or maybe a rail track from Kurnagal to Haparana. Those are not the things that we should ask them.
Right.
We have to ask them for technology. See, this whole trade war is about technology. Today and tomorrow is about technology, and we are pretty much not in it. We are still with apparel and remittances. We have to make sure that we get the technology from China. We have to insist, okay, if you want things from us, what we need is technology. Get your Huawei's, your Lenovo's to invest here, so that there's a technology transfer. Factories open up here. There's job opportunities for our people, and mostly we get into this technology value chain. That's what we should ask for. Obviously, we'll have to give things of value. If we are to get things of value, we will have to give things of value to them as well.
FDI has been nothing spectacular, even in the past.
Sure.
It's been a struggle.
Yeah.
In spite of things like the BOI and all sorts of road shows and this, that and the other, Sri Lanka has failed spectacularly in attracting big business. We don't have any, well, we have one or two, but we don't have any new big business. The closest thing to big business that came in this last 4.5 years was something called a Volkswagen plant. And it turned out to be a hoax. So, apart from the Volkswagen, we don't have, they promised thousands of jobs and so on and so forth. And it appears to me that we missed the boat several years ago when Upali Vijayawardena brought his assembly plant here. So, that was maybe ahead of the times. But now, what have we got?
Yeah, so
we've got people who are importing bits and pieces of cars.
So the FDIs mean these are the equity investors. For us to attract such investors, we need to have high growth. See, investors don't come when the growth is 2-3%. Investors need 7-8% growth. See, the classic examples I would say in the private sector, the Facebooks and the Amazons and many of the success stories. Initial years, they were not focusing on financial discipline. They were making losses in the first few years, but they were growing very fast. They were capturing market share and they were growing, and the investors were always with them. Look at Vietnam. They have a fairly high fiscal deficit, but they're growing fast. That's why the investors go there. So that's why Sri Lanka needs to revive growth. Like I said at the very beginning, we are a low-income country. We have to get the growth going. So that's the first thing. So once that happens, we will see all the investors coming in. But right now, we are only attracting the lenders.
But to begin with all of this, you need the foundation.
Sure.
And the foundation should be where policy is stable.
Sure.
You need to have stable policies, not to come into power one morning and then say, oh, do you know what, all you guys who made over 2 billion profit, you made it illegally, you made it whirlwind profits, and guess what, we're going to backdate it and you're going to have to pay taxes. What kind of complete, utter rubbish is that? What sort of policy is that?
So that's why the plan should be in place before you come into power. When you come into power, like I said, from day one you should be executing the plan, not make the plans once you come into power. So that's why what we unfortunately see is before the elections, it's all about politics, candidates, alliances and so on, but hardly anything about the policy or the plan. So that's why the plan should be in place before you come into power, so that then from day one you can start executing it. So at least that's my effort, to at least put up some practical these things, so that people can take, any party can take it and make it their plan.
on Newsline, we encourage you to send us your questions, 0772 300 305 by SMS, please, and a card coming up on your screen. We are in conversation with Varuna Singapuri, who's an economic analyst and an author, as it turns out. And we do welcome your questions. One of them's already some of the questions already been coming in, and it says here, whilst we are focusing on the economy, society, environment, entrepreneurship with equal priority, together to sustain development, we should not be getting into debt traps going forward. So how do you balance the debt traps?
See, if a person is anemic, you can't take blood out of him. See, you will just kill the person.
Yeah.
So what is more practical is to give him proper medication and maybe even infuse blood so that you make him healthy. And once he is healthy, you can probably take the blood out. So similarly, right now, if you try to reduce the debt and really stagnate the economy, it'll basically destroy the economy. So it may not work. What you have to do is, like I said, revive the economy, get to a high growth scenario, get to a sustainable high growth scenario, and then you can slowly reduce the debt. Right now, trying to do it is premature, and we will make the matters worse.
You've written a book, A Simple Plan. Newsfirst has collected data by visiting village to village. It's called the Gammadda movement. In that report, it's absolutely astounding. Sorry, I do beg your pardon. 62% of the people had problems with drinking water. How do you resolve major issues like that? Is it before this or after that?
No, like I said, get the income to a higher level. See, all these are symptoms in my view. See, you get to a higher income position from 4,000 to 10,000, then you would see naturally some of these things getting sorted out. So I mentioned about the relationship with China. The other part of that equation is to negotiate with USA, and that again is not to ask for a few $100 million of aid, but to make us a most favored nation, similar to what happened with South Korea, Japan and Taiwan, which would open up the market for our manufacturers. See, we get technology from China and we export to USA. That should be the game plan for Sri Lanka, which would open up a lot of jobs and factories and income for all these households across the country. So that should be our game plan with USA as well.
I mean, the greatest so-called success that successive governments have had in Sri Lanka is the export of labor. And foreign remittances. I mean, God forbid if they didn't have that, because what would they do then? But expatriates going abroad, especially the domestic labor market, has its own problems, family values, social problems. People going out there, one's left behind here, the kids are unfocused, and eventually it impacts on the greater picture. The short-term fix is that the dollars that we're getting from about over 1 million people working in the Middle East and in the sort of Near East. So how do you explain to these people that you don't need to do that, but you can? Isn't one of the real problems, though, that unlike if we look at Korea, for example, we at one point many years ago, Sri Lanka's economy was better than theirs. It's shocking but true. And if you examine the Korean model, they only had labor, and they exploited that, or they highlighted that, and they got all these other companies to come with their technology, and finally they focused on manufacturing and the export sector. President Park traveled to the villages and got everyone to understand that they needed to participate in this export drive, the manufacturing drive. Why can't this model be put into action here?
So that's the thing. So I agree with you. So basically, if you look at Hyundai, it was a case of getting technology from Japan and exporting to USA. It's the same thing that I explained as well. So as you talked about the worker remittances, I completely agree as well. So that's why I said we have to start the manufacturing process. That's why we need the technology from China and open up the market in USA, so that there'll be jobs in Sri Lanka, so that they don't have to leave the country. They'll be in the country and there'll be factories opening up,
But
SMEs
in between
and so
all
on.
this
Yeah.
is the danger that in pursuing these policies to have an economic benefit, that we have to be mindful that there is nothing called a free lunch or free anything.
Absolutely.
And therefore, we have to draw the line.
Absolutely.
And that line is where our sovereignty is there.
Absolutely.
We can't possibly have Trump or anyone else tell us that, you know, you need to do X, Y, Z, you need to have an economic corridor,
Sure.
and all sorts of things.
Sure.
And here's a bit of money.
Sure.
What's $480 million? It's
Sure.
in the bigger scheme of things, it's not a lot of money.
Sure.
And if it is to do rural development, to up the ante of the people who are living out there, the forgotten people of Sri Lanka, if you get everybody, if every village is given an opportunity to play some role in doing some form of export, some form of manufacturing, then it might actually make a difference, because the people out there are really suffering. And we have, with the help of the University of Peradeniya, put this whole thing together. I do wish that some politicians will actually look at the report, and they will see for themselves. You know, you have the human-elephant conflict. There are so many. I mean, they're building highways, but there are no roads in the rural areas, anything to talk of anyway. You know, so if you like, to borrow something that my grandmother would have said, it's you know, outside show and inside war. And inside Sri Lanka, in the rural areas, or the non-urban areas, that is actually a woeful scenario taking place as we speak. There'll be kids walking to school for maybe 3 kilometers. There'll be others who are having to walk to various places to get drinking water. These basic human rights have been forgotten.
Sure. I think you said something very right, that there's a cost for everything. The world, and even the smallest unit works in a give and get model. So remember when South Korea and Japan developed, when they got access to the US market, there are also military bases, US military bases in Japan, there are US military bases in South Korea. So there was a price they had to pay for that economic development. Let us not forget that. So there's always a cost for everything. So that's why I said, when we negotiate, we have to be very careful. We have to be proactive rather than reactive. We have to tell them what we want, rather than them deciding what we should get.
That's right.
We
so
should start with that.
We need strong leadership.
Absolutely, we need a strong negotiation team for sure. That's the starting point. So we have to negotiate very strongly, but we have to be realistic and practical to know that there will be real costs if we are to get real benefits. For a second, I'm not saying that we need to have bases here, but just understand what happened in the world in the past. What are the prices they had to pay? And even for that, even US paid a price. So when the Hondas and the Toyotas and the Hyundais and the Samsungs invaded the US market, the US car makers and the US phone makers suffered a lot. So they had to pay a huge economic price for that. So it's not that US didn't pay anything. It's always a price and a cost for everything. So it's give and get. You have to be very careful and decide what you ask for and what you can give. Like you said, we shouldn't allow our security to be affected in a material way. So that has to be decided by our defense experts, and I'm not a defense expert. So it's always a give and take. You have to know where to draw the line, as you said.
Now then, but how? So how do you balance here? You can't only balance the Chinese and the Americans.
Sure.
It's an inalienable fact that India is our neighbor,
Sure.
and they can come to our aid.
Sure.
before we can finish saying Jack Robinson.
Sure. It's
or
just that
Narendra Modi, for that matter.
Sure. So it's just that I mentioned USA because that's the first market that all these countries develop. Japan, even China and Vietnam for that matter, they all develop because of the US market. So that's why it's a very important part. And China also, it's the place where we can get technology rather than more than India. I think China is more interested in Sri Lanka because they want things from us rather than India. We have to keep India in the loop, obviously, mostly for political purposes rather than economic. But there is
it's a big market and it's only a few miles out.
It's a big market, but penetrating markets like India and China is an uphill task for us because those are low-cost markets. Their per capita income is lower than us. So where's the edge for our manufacturers? Although a lot of people say, okay, those are big markets, it's not practical because all those countries that developed in the recent decades, they developed by entering developed markets where they can go at a low cost and penetrate and get the technology.
Right. So, so you're articulating a position where you want to sort of lean more towards the West.
Not really. It's a balanced game. You know, you have to. That's why I say it's a negotiation process. You tell each to the bigger players what you need, and you ask them what they want in return. So it's a negotiation process. You have to draw the line how much you can give to each person and how much you get. So it's an evaluating process. I'm not going to say what the final conclusion is going to be like.
What's this going to do to our overall debt position?
So like I said earlier, so debt is not something that you can address tomorrow, even the fiscal deficit for that matter, right? So right now what we have is a fiscal consolidation process where we have tried to increase tax rates and reduce government expenditure, but in the process we have not achieved what we wanted to achieve because the fiscal deficit has not improved, because the moment you increase taxes and the moment you cut down government expenditure, you are seeing the growth coming down to 2-3%. So when the growth is so low, you are anyway not going to collect much tax revenue. So it has anyway not worked out. So that's why I say first we need to revive the economy, get the economy going, and then once the economy is in a stable position, then you start slowly reducing the budget deficit and so on. See, like I said earlier, the example of Facebooks and Amazons, if they had focused on not making losses in the first few years, they would have been out of business many years ago. Right. Instead, what they did was they grew, and they grew so fast that they wiped out the competition. And once they reached a certain level, then they of course focus on the financial discipline. The same thing we should do. We should grow fast and get the attention of the large investors and lock them into Sri Lanka. And once that happens, we can focus on these. If not, if we don't do that, if those investors go and settle in Bangladesh and Vietnam, we have lost the match.
Yes, but this is all for the US, for example. The biggest thing is, as we were discussing earlier, is the apparel market.
Sure.
But whilst that's important, that's only one aspect, if you like.
Yeah.
Manufacturing is in the doldrums here. You have a few who are doing what they can and getting better at it.
Sure.
But there's nothing really. There's no intense effort on the part of government to encourage these exporters. The minute they find groups making money, they devise ingenious ways of taxing them. Manufacturing is not encouraged. Manufacturing is in fact in a way ironically discouraged, where local manufacturers are being hit. And yes, we know about this because within the group we've got manufacturing units, and the taxes come in mysterious and sometimes I'd say surreptitious ways, and it's all slipped in between here and there. The end result is that manufacturers are not being given any impetus. So our exports are in the doldrums, manufacturing is in the doldrums, grandiose plans of 1 million jobs, but where?
Yeah.
How does?
Yeah. So that's why we can't find solutions internally. That's my whole logic of this book. So we have to resort to these foreign assistance. So it's not a fault of the politicians or the governments, I would say, because you can't find solutions internally, because we have already hit a low middle income trap. It's going beyond that. We need those foreign relations that I told you about. Without those sponsorships or assistance, we really can't make it work. Because see, nobody would come to here, because where are the competitive advantage for us? Why should an investor come and invest here? What are the special critical factors do we have that? So that's why we need that government level negotiation to bring them in first, get the technology transfer, then we have the base in place for those industries to grow.
How do you react to this, that capitalists may exploit us while the communists deceive us?
Well, see, you can't go into any extreme. There are good things about communism, there are good things about capitalism. So that's why I wouldn't go down any extreme path. You have to take the goods of all these theories and logics, and then make sure you devise your own plan without going into one particular plan. So one more thing that I actually wanted to tell was the government has to play a big role here in the form of, say, for this whole strategy to work, we have to make sure when the Chinese investors or the technology or SME investors come in, they would want to know, do we have the labor? Do we have the other things in place? So the government has to provide that. They have to make sure, yes, we are going to set up the universities, academies, training colleges.
Yes, but the government can't even sort out the
I'm talking about this particular plan where they should give that comfort during the negotiation process.
When big manufacturing units come in here, rather like in the apparel industry, as you know, several years ago, the big brands became very conscious about slave labor, child labor, sweatshops and so on. And so you can see how that industry has come around. The quality has improved with, again, some spectacular failures, like when that huge complex in Bangladesh collapsed and killed many people and so on. So those are, some of the good, better things that can happen. But the fact is that, isn't it the best thing that, the fact is that politicians have really failed. And so therefore they should let the people who know what they're doing, the private sector, as long as they create the ambience and create the different roads on which private sector and entrepreneurs can traverse, that would be the best thing, because the government clearly have failed. One of these so-called national airlines has cost over 17 billion rupees, and that's not chicken feed. 17 billion is about the sum total that is estimated to have been lost by the EPF in the infamous bond scam, right? So we are talking big numbers here. So clearly the government can't do business. They're too, everything's top heavy with politically motivated. It's all politically motivated. Jobs, every incoming person will give jobs in all these favorite places. The airline is always the favorite place.
Well, I would refuse to put the blame on just one segment of the society. I think we have to take collective responsibility in different scales. See, how many people have tried to come up with a practical solution as well? Like I said at the very beginning, people criticize, but nobody really offers practically how things could be done. Even if you look at the private sector, it's predominantly a short-term profit-oriented segment. We have, how many of the private sector has tried to do long-term value addition? Only very few exceptions. In fact, I have mentioned in this book as well, only few exceptions have tried to create long-term value, even with low capital bases. See, if you look at the high capital based big conglomerates, how many have tried to create that long-term value? They just focus on short-term profit. So I don't think it's right.
I think it's also fair to say that some wouldn't want to consider too much of a long-term, or to take too much of a long-term.
But then there are actual scenarios
because government come in there and they whack you. They whack you with backdated taxes.
Yeah, sure. You can find excuses, but then there are real examples of people who have done it.
They're not excuses, because when you decide to tax corporates who've been successful, and you then backdate it, this is
Sure.
coming a couple of years after these chaps have distributed
Sure,
their
sure.
profits, made their expansion plans, and are on that road, when they suddenly say, oh, well, you've got to pay us this amount of money. And then we have none other than the Prime Minister who turns up at one meeting and says, oh, the economy is in such a bad shape, chaps, that's why we had to tax you fellows, and makes it so very nice and easy and almost palatable. But he's forgotten that they've all been described as rogues, basically. And these people have paid taxes.
Sure.
And we're not living in a democracy when the Prime Minister and his cohorts, ministers, pronounce that people have been acting illegally and generating whirlwind profits.
Sure. I think the blame has to be put on the advisors and the experts as well. See, politicians are in a different subject. Political activity is one area of expertise, but coming up with a practical economic policy is probably should be done by the experts or people who can do it, a practical plan. So that's why I would say we have hardly seen anybody coming up with that. That's why at least I made an effort to come up with that.
You have given a what you call a simple plan. I'm grateful for this message in the last minute or so. What Uncle Sam did was to use RW to ruin every possible industry so they could come in with their dollars and take over. Whoever sent this thing should have come in with their dollars and attempting to take over.
Yeah. So like I said, see, there are real life scenarios in the past. So you have the case of Syria's and Libya's and Iraq's where US did whatever. That's what we always hear. But do we hear about what US did to South Korea, Taiwan and Japan? So that's another scenario. So it's up to us to decide which path we take. We can take either of these paths.
The bottom line is we need strong leadership.
Yes, absolutely. And a strong negotiating team.
So country first, Sri Lanka first should be a good theme.
Sure.
On that note, we've run out. We've overrun. Goodness me. Warren Singapore, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's the way it was on Newsline this morning. Take care. Have an excellent week ahead. And of course, do bear in mind that those who dare, the Executive of the Year is on the 29th for those who dare. Just as News First, we dare to be different. Take care. God bless.
News First, Newsline with Faraz Shaukat Ali.